Hey guys, Yips here, coming with a video, and this one's going to be about the World of Warcraft Alpha Battle for Azeroth patch notes for Warlock, specifically Affliction, um, and just talking about basically the future for Warlock in Battle for Azeroth and how we're kind of looking in terms of playstyle. Obviously, things like damage, all that stuff is sort of irrelevant at this point because there's going to be many tuning passes, many things that are destined to change regarding the amount of damage you actually deal. But obviously the dream for Affliction, at least for me, is, I don't care so much about my single target. What I care about is being able to go on a fight with multiple targets and just dot the world and do a billion damage. So hopefully we're going to be able to see that, and I think a lot of the talents kind of play towards that as an Affliction lock, being the more targets that you have available to you, the more damage that you can deal. So here is the MMO champion thread for these spell changes for Warlock. I'll have these linked in the description below, as well as the talent calculator that I'm going to look at later. And these just list the various changes. Specifically, I'm going to focus on the Affliction ones here, and more specifically, the ones that are going to be relevant for playstyle changes. So, Drain Life is still in the game, but it doesn't look like they're going to be keeping Drain Soul, meaning that we're not going to be able to snipe shards anymore, which I think is fine. I think sniping shards, while being a skilled mechanic in terms of you need to be able to manage sniping shards as well as spending them on a boss fight, I also think that it was just a little bit too powerful, and having that in the game just limits the ability for the amount of damage that your Unstable Affliction can do. So Drain Life is replacing that, so it's going to be used as a heal, and our main filler is going to be Shadow Bolt. So they are bringing back Shadow Bolt for the Warlock class as your main filler spell, and I kind of like that. I didn't like sitting there draining all the time. Pressing a button repeatedly to do damage is going to be a lot more interesting for me, plus it just, I think, looks cooler in general. So I'm glad they're bringing back Shadow Bolt to the game, and not only by bringing back Shadow Bolt, this actually allows them to do something else with the talents as well that I'll talk about later. All here, like you guys see all these sort of percent things, don't worry about them. That's just them scaling down the damage that each ability actually deals. And the reason they're doing that obviously is because there's a huge stat squish coming, and they probably don't want abilities just hitting too hard. And generally speaking, having large percent modifiers is not a good thing in World of Warcraft or in any game whatsoever. If you don't know what I'm talking about, having really big percent modifiers can really mess with the scaling as you get more and more gear. Another really cool thing that's happening is Shadow Fury. All the Warlock specs are getting Shadow Fury. It's going to be a minute cooldown. It's going to stun all targets within 8 yards for 3 seconds on a 1.5 second cast. I'm really happy this is entering the game. As an Affliction lock, you always just kind of felt stuck in terms of your ability to stop casts. If you weren't able to have a CS pet, you'd have to choose a stun or whatever. Now you don't have to worry about it. You have this stun. You have Shadow Fury now, which is a really nice flavor. It's going to be really good for dungeons and also for raiding. If there are ever adds that are stunnable, you're going to be able to have this to use. So that's really, really, really good. I'm really happy this is entering the game. So that's pretty much all the changes we have for the base Warlock class with regards to Affliction. But moving down, there are a lot of new talent changes for the Affliction lock, and I'm actually going to go over here to the talent calculator to talk about those. So here we have the talents. As you can see, this is a lot of changes, and I'm sure it's going to change more in the future too. I'm sure this is not the last iteration that we'll be seeing, but this does seem pretty well thought out and finished to me, so I wouldn't be surprised if this is the first build that we see on live. In our level 15 talents, we have 3 choices. We have Shadow Embrace, Haunt, and Death Bolt. So you guys remember earlier in the video how I was talking about Shadow Bolt being there and how this leads to other talents being available? Well, here we have Shadow Embrace. So Shadow Bolt applies Shadow Embrace, increasing your damage dealt to the target by 3% for 10 seconds, stacks up to 3 times. So you can imagine, you put your dots on a boss. Every time you cast Shadow Bolt, you put a stacking debuff on him. That increased the amount of damage he takes by 3%, stacking up to 3 times. Obviously, that will lead to a 9% damage increase modifier. Next to this talent, we have Haunt on a 10-second cooldown. That's really, really nice. A Ghostly Soul haunts the target, dealing 100% of spell power, shadow damage, and increasing your damage dealt to the target by 10% for 12 seconds. This is kind of like an old school Haunt in terms of it's actually going to be part of your rotation. It's not just going to be a debuff you're putting on your target. It's going to hit for a significant amount of damage, so obviously you want to be using this on cooldown. And then also it increases your damage by 10% for 12 seconds, so you have a little bit of a window in there to maintain 100% uptime on this, and as you can see, it is stronger than Shadow Embrace by 1%, so most likely this will be the go-to single target talent. Next we have Death Bolt. launches a bolt of death at the target, dealing 15% of the total remaining damage of your overtime effects on the target. If you're talented into Absolute Corruption, which makes your corruptions permanent, it only counts up to 16 seconds of the corruption's damage, which makes sense. So what I could see this talent being used for a lot of the time, the Deathbolt talent is, imagine a boss where you're generating a lot of extra soul shards and you're supposed to be focusing down one target. Obviously, drain sniping is not in the game anymore, but I'm going to use that as an example. So on Portal Keeper, you're able to have 5 soul shards a lot of the time, which means you're able to cast 5 unstable afflictions at the target a lot of the time. So if you're able to have 5 UAs on the target, and then you press this button and get all of that bonus damage from those unstable afflictions, that is where this talent is really going to shine. Whether or not it's actually going to be better than Haunt or Shadow Embrace, hard to say, but either way, that's the scenario I could imagine this talent being used in. The next tier, we have our level 30 traits. We have Writhe and Agony, Absolute Corruption, and Life Tap. And to me, these kind of speak to me as single target, crazy amount of multi-target, and cleave. The reason being is because, Writhe and Agony is super good on 2-3 target cleaving where you're actually able to maintain your dots, that being, Corruption and Agonies fairly easily. And Absolute Corruption, when you have 5 or 6 targets and you're running around trying to dot your head off, it can be really challenging to maintain all of those dots. So that's why Absolute Corruption would be used against, maybe like a 4 or 5 target fight where there are a lot of adds that are spaced out that you need to dot. And maybe on a 2 or 3 target cleave fight, you would choose Writhe and Agony to have your Agony do more damage. Life Tap has been entirely changed. You no longer have Life Tap as a Warlock, which means I'm assuming you no longer have mana as a Warlock, or something like that. So it grants 1 soul shard at the cost of 15% of your maximum health. I could imagine this being used on single target just as extra shard gen. Whether or not it will output the damage of Writhe and Agony or Absolute Corruption on single target, I'm not sure, but 1 soul shard, on a 30-second cooldown is actually pretty powerful. If the rates stay the same, you generate around, I think it's like 7 or 8 soul shards per minute. It might be a little bit less. That was with Soulphagy. It was 8 per minute. It might be 6 per minute now. So basically, you're getting 2 extra shards per minute, which is a huge increase to your overall shard count. So that could be good, when you need to cast more unstable afflictions. 45 is just, your defensive tier along with Burning Rush. So either you get to choose the utility of the movement, or you get Demon Skin or Dark Pact. Pretty standard there. Level 60 talents, we have the same stuff as before, although slightly changed in terms of how they work. We have Sow the Seeds, Phantom Singularity, and Soul Harvest. This is currently in the live iteration now, but Soul Harvest is a little bit different. Increases your damage and your pet's damage by 20%, lasts 4 seconds, increased by 6 for each target afflicted by your Agony up to a maximum of 36 seconds. Obviously, you're only going to want to pick this on fights where you're able to get a bunch of Agonies out and then proc a really big Soul Harvest. Otherwise, I think we'll be choosing Phantom Singularity, which obviously does that AoE DPS. And Sow the Seeds has been changed to, instead of spreading 3 seeds, it's only going to spread 2. So obviously, this is going to be used in AoE scenarios with a large amount of enemies available. In our level 75 tree, we have Empowered Healthstone, Mortal Coil, and Demonic Circle. Again, more utility. Healthstone just heals for an additional amount of HP. Mortal Coil, obviously the same thing, 3-second in cap and heals you 20% of your maximum HP. Demonic Circle, same as always, just a nice little port. I think most situations we'll be picking Demonic Circle or Empowered Healthstone. Mortal Coil can be nice on some fights, but I think, the fact that it costs a global cooldown is, pretty valuable, so we'll probably be picking one of the other 2 choices. Now, a lot of the new talents are coming in now, a lot of the new flavor stuff in the next few trees, so we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about this. So, we have Nightfall. This is equivalent to the old Wrath of the Lich King style Warlock. Corruption has a chance when it deals damage to cause your next Shadow Bolt to be instant and deal 25% increased damage. Death's Embrace is the same as it is on live. Your dots just have that execute trait where when the boss gets lower and lower, you deal more and more damage up to a maximum of 50% bonus damage when that boss is pretty much dead. And then Grimoire of Sacrifice has been changed to the old version. So sacrifice your demon pet for power, gaining its command demon ability and 15% increased damage done. Lasts 60 minutes or until you summon a demon pet. So these talents to me speak on different levels. Obviously, the single target choice is either going to be Sacrifice or Death's Embrace. I don't think we're going to be using Nightfall on single target, simply due to the fact that Shadow Embrace and Nightfall synergize really well together, and I don't think that we're going to be using Shadowy Embrace on single target because Haunt is 10% and this is 9%. And since I think that these two really synchronize well together, I think we'll be seeing it on different fights, not so much those ones where you'll be single targeting. So that's why I think these two talents will be chosen. And whether or not Death's Embrace or Grimoire of Sacrifice will be chosen, I'm not entirely sure, but 15% damage done overall is actually quite a large amount. It's just going to depend on how much DPS we're actually dealing at the time. So all of these talents are obviously really powerful in their own, sort of niche scenarios. Nightfall, you can imagine using this on a boss where you're able to spread a ton of corruptions, but you only want to focus down a couple of mobs. So if we use Coven as a really good example here, right? You have two bosses and you have a bunch of ads, and whenever those ads spawns, you'll have so many corruptions rolling that you're just going to be constantly proccing those instant shadow bolts. And what you can actually do is when you're running Shadowy Embrace, you can maintain that 9% on two mobs, right? So obviously Shadowy Embrace and Nightfall on cleave type fights is going to be excellent because you're going to be maintaining increased damage modifiers on those mobs for a length of time. Death's Embrace, obviously just a standard execute talent, probably will be good on multiple targets as well, simply because of the amount of globals that you have to spend. And then Sacrifice is just a flat damage increase, so really strong there as well. The level 100 talents, we only see one new talent here, but we have Soul Conduit, Siphon Life, and Creeping Death. Your Agony and Corruption deal their full damage 15% faster. This is similar to the Feral Druid talent that makes their bleeds tick more quickly. Basically, if you have the globals to spend and you want your dots to tick faster, they'll do more damage. Soul Conduit, every shard you spend has a 15% chance to be refunded, and Siphon Life is obviously just a dot. Now, how strong Creeping Death is going to be, I think will depend a lot on the nature of the boss fight. I think boss fights with a lot of movement where you don't get to stand still very often, it could be very strong, obviously, because you're not going to be spending globals sitting there and casting, so you'll have more time to be refreshing your dots. It also could be really powerful on fights where you're generating a lot of unstable afflictions and you want them to expire really quickly for some reason. If you can't have, 5 of them on the timers, you know what I mean? There's just a lot of potential for this talent. Not too sure where it will be used in yet, but it definitely does seem quite strong. Soul Conduit, obviously standard talent, 15% chance to have a soul shard refunded. This talent will largely depend on how powerful Unstable Affliction and Seed of Corruptions are. If they're dealing a lot of damage, we'll be sure to see this talent being used. If not, then we'll probably go for one of the other two. And then finally, Siphon Life obviously is an excellent talent on multiple targets, and it might even be the single target talent choice. I could imagine it being used as a single target talent choice just because it adds a little bit more of a dot to the build, which is really, really nice. So we have a lot of new talents, quite a few new ability changes. Again, I will put this in the description if you're interested. A lot of changes happening to Destro and Demo. Obviously, I'm an Affliction lock, so I'm going to focus on that. Maybe in the future I'll make a video covering the Destro and Demonology changes as well. But to me, I kind of like the changes. It seems like they're bringing back a lot of the Wrath stuff, whether that's for nostalgia or whether or not just because they feel like Wrath, Warlock, Affliction gameplay was good. It remains to be seen. But for me, having the ability to play with Shadow Bolt again with Nightfall procs and stuff like that is going to be really, really enjoyable. And I'm really interested to see how all of these talents work on multiple targets. So anyways, thanks for watching the video. Hopefully this gives you a little bit of insight towards the new expansion coming out, and I'll see you guys later. Have a good one.